So, house training or house breaking your puppy, part 2. I'd already recorded this second part, but I watched it back last night and it was too long and just a bit rubbish, really. So, I thought I'd have another go and try and make it a little bit more to the point, because I do have a tendency to ramble on a little bit. So, previous video, I explained that I think the best way to toilet train your puppy is by using the crate method and by taking the puppy out a lot, 10, 15, 20 times a day, however much the puppy needs. Sometimes I'll use the word dog instead of puppy. You can use this method to train an adult dog as well, but we're concentrating mainly on puppies. So what that looks like is you need to be getting up early with your dog, your puppy, and the first thing you want to be doing when you go out, you take them outside and they go to the toilet. We're training them, so we're going to use positivity and it's all going to be a wonderful experience for them. So we're marrying a command almost to it. So I say to my dogs to go for a wee-wee, and they've learnt what this means. So you go outside, when the dog's sort of sniffing around, you use that phrase. You say it while the dog's doing it. Then afterwards, we've got lots of praise, lots of stroking, telling them how great they are. Personally, I don't use treats whilst toilet training. I don't think it's necessary, and the puppy will probably end up with quite a lot of treats whilst you're teaching it other things as well. So the last thing it needs really is another 20 treats a day, because that's the sort of amount of time you should be taking the puppy out, particularly when it's very young. So we want to be looking for signs that the puppy needs to go to the toilet at all times, and we should be watching that puppy anyway at home. What we want to be looking for is really starting to concentrate, like sniffing in an area, or tail goes between the legs. And of course there's really clear signs like the dog starts to squat, and if that happens, the dog needs to be taken outside, put into the garden, and hopefully they'll do their business, or what's left of it, if they've already started, which will happen. But this is a process. It's not going to be instant. Sometimes you'll have a puppy. I had a spaniel who, she came home as an 8-week-old puppy. She never toileted in the house for her whole life. Very lucky. She was trained, but we never had an accident with her. My French Bulldog, on the other hand, she was a little bit of a nightmare, but like with everything, consistency is what we need to get into this process, just like we do with everything that we do with them. So I got a bit distracted by my dogs then. I thought one of them had something in her mouth, but she didn't. So yeah, you'll learn to be able to read when your dog needs to go to the toilet. You know, they pretty much do very similar things, but you'll learn what is more specific to your dog. The quicker you learn that, the quicker you're going to be able to identify an opportunity to get the dog outside. And as I've said before, this could be many times during the day. But all you have to keep telling yourself when you're standing in your garden for the 11th time that day in the pouring rain, and puppy doesn't really seem to be that interested, and I would say you need to be taking them outside probably at least once every half an hour. They can't hold a lot of fluid and a lot of food at that age, and obviously after they've eaten and after they've drunk as well is a good time to get them outside. I tend to wait a few minutes, maybe 5 minutes, just let everything start working its way through. So by doing this, and they get the great reinforcement, it will encourage them gradually Sometimes dogs pick it up really quickly, sometimes not so quickly, but it will enforce what we want them to do, and they'll get the hang of it if you do this properly and consistently. So another question, just before I just quickly switch on to another topic. Another question that I get asked quite a lot is how to deal with it when a puppy has toileted already and you find it. So that's really easy. What you do is you clean it up and you move on. You don't address the dog. It won't be effective because the puppy, particularly a young puppy, it won't understand 20 minutes later when you find that little parcel on the kitchen floor. It won't understand what it is and what the correction is. There's no point in telling them off. There's no point in screaming and shouting because it's going to have absolutely no effect on the process. You're just going to potentially create a catalyst later in life for anxiety in your dog, and then that can bring a whole host of other problems along with it. So we ignore it, we clean it up, and we forget about it. The dog will have accidents, the puppy will make mistakes. I bet you that they will if you've just got a puppy. But consistency, we should be watching them like a hawk anyway, because your home is full of hazards. And we're making sure they're not eating things they shouldn't be, that they're not chewing and ingesting things that they shouldn't be, that they're not chewing electrical cables. We should know where our puppy is at all times anyway. A lot of trainers say that a puppy should be kept on the lead for the first few weeks in the house. Do I do that? No, I don't do that. I personally don't think that that's particularly necessary, but we should always be aware of what they're doing and where they are. So just going back to dealing with an incident where your dog has toileted, there's just one thing I want to be really, really clear about, and that is, do not listen to these people that will say to you the best thing to do is to stick the dog's face in it, rub the puppy's nose in it, get the puppy by the scruff of the neck and show them the wee or whatever on the floor and tell them how bad they are and correct them. This is not behaviour rectification. We don't need to go into the realms of punishment and correction. And my leadership and consistent style of training as a balanced trainer, physical punishment like that is not what we're about. We use a little bit of force sometimes to correct the dog, but that doesn't mean hitting a dog. You're not training a dog if you're hitting them. You are abusing them, is what you're doing. You're attacking an animal, and that's not on. We don't do that. So the second sort of part of this is just carrying on from what I said about puppy pads. So just in brief, if you haven't seen the first video, a lot of people will use puppy pads to train their dogs, or the puppies. And what the theory behind that is that you put some pads down in the house and the puppy will be drawn to those and will urinate and defecate on them. And this is great in theory because they're not doing it on your carpet or your rugs or your nice flooring. But I personally don't think that this is a great method. I think that the hard work and the consistency and utilising a crate at night time and during the day for enforced timeouts and stuff, but that's a whole different video, but can be really beneficial if your puppy's biting and things like that. They can be overtired, just like a little one can, just like a human toddler, baby, child can be. So there I am rambling. So we're teaching our dog to use the pads. All is great. Now the pads are maybe not the cheapy ones, but a lot of them are impregnated with a chemical, some synthetic stuff that basically encourages the dog to go to the toilet on them. And it's the same stuff that you'll find in the things that they sell in garden centres called pee posts and things like that, which are supposed to encourage your dog to only go and have a whittle in a certain part of the garden to save your lawn and what have you. So outside, yeah, I think that's not a bad idea. If you particularly like your lawn, then that could be for you. But in the house, I think that using pads and using the method of using puppy pads, I think effectively what you're doing is you're teaching the puppy that it is okay to toilet in the house, albeit on a pad, which you're supposed to, gradually reduce the size. You might have 2 or 3 together. You might take it down to 2 to 1. You start moving them across, and then eventually there's one by the back door. And what the theory is that it teaches the dog to go to the back door when it needs the toilet. The problem that can arise is, like I just said, I think that you're effectively teaching the dog that it can toilet in the house. Albeit it's on a pad, it's still in the house, which is not acceptable, and I don't want. The second issue that can arise is upon removing the pads, the dog can start looking for rugs and mats and things like that, and this can then cause them to urinate and defecate on them, and that's something that I've helped some clients with. So if that happens, what we'll do is we'll run our rugs and towels or whatever it is that they've done it on through the washing machine, and we think it then smells lovely. But just like a puppy pad, having a scent in there which attracts them to do it in the first place, our rugs and mats and doormats, etc., still smell a bit to a dog. We have to remember how powerful their sense of smell is. So we might be able to smell Daz Ultra and think everything's great, but they know it's there, and they can still smell it, and it's going to encourage them to keep on going back to it and back to it and back to it. And this is why I don't think that it's the best method, using pads. I also think that it's a fair bit slower than just being intensive and getting the dog into the habit and the routine of going outside. That's ultimately going to be your goal. So why not get that into them rather than delaying it by allowing them to do it in your house, albeit on something which we think it's okay for them to do it on. Another thing as well, I just want to touch on really briefly, because like the first one, this is starting to go on a little bit more than I wanted it to, is something I get asked, and some people do it, and if they feel like you need to do it, then of course it's your dog, it's your decision. But personally, I don't necessarily think it's the best thing to do, and that is getting up in the middle of the night to let the dog out. Sorry, I got a little bit distracted there. I ended up just coming across 2 people I know with their dog. So yeah, letting your dog out at night, getting up in the middle of the night, in theory, yeah, that's a good idea. And if you want to do that, like I said, you can do that. It's your dog. And if that makes you happy, then crack on with it. But personally, I would rather start getting the dog used to holding itself, because ultimately that's what you're going to want it to do when it's an adult. So starting from day one, I think it's just the best way to go with it. There's no ambiguity, there's no grey area then. I know people that are sort of setting their alarms at 2, they're going to bed at 10 o'clock and they're setting their alarm at midnight and then again at 3, and then they're getting up at 5:30, 6 o'clock. And that's not good for you either. Yeah, it won't be forever. They aren't puppies forever, and it gets easier as long as you've instilled the leadership, the consistency, you've got everything in place that you want. But you don't want to be doing that. It's hard enough as it is. I think you're better off going to bed a bit later. So when we've got a puppy, I'll probably go to bed about midnight. And the last thing they'll do is they'll use the toilet. And then I'll set my alarm for 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning. So they have 6 hours. And that tends to be okay because they don't want a toilet where they sleep. That's part of the theory of using the crate. So anyway, this has actually ended up being longer than the first one, but I think this one has been a little bit clearer and I've cut out a lot of the bits that I didn't really need to say in the last one. So I hope you found it helpful. Any questions, or you know anybody that's struggling with this or anything with their puppies, put them in touch with me. I'll be happy to help them. And now I've got to think of something else to do a video on. Thanks for taking the time to watch it, I really appreciate it. I'll speak to you all soon.